Look at that rainbow. So as the pandemic nears its 13th month, more Americans are starting to fly again. The Transportation Security Administration has screened more than 1 million travelers per day for more than 2 weeks in a row. So CBS News transportation correspondent Errol Barnett joins us now with more on what's going on in the world of travel. So Errol, we could say travel is surging again in the country, but I presume it's nowhere near pre-pandemic levels.
Anne-Marie, you're exactly right. And you're hitting the right numbers as far as how we measure where things stand now compared to 1 year ago, compared to 2 years ago. We are seeing an uptick. As you mentioned, the TSA has reported actually 17 straight days of more than 1 million people being screened at U.S. airports. That's significant because it hasn't happened at any point, even during the holidays, hasn't happened at any point during the past year. But when you go back further and you compare it to pre-pandemic levels, it still pales in comparison. I'll give you a direct example. On Saturday, 1.4 million Americans were screened at checkpoints, but when you look at that same date in 2019, it was more than 2 million. So we are at about 66% of pre-pandemic levels. There's kind of a long way to go, but more people are being vaccinated, and spring break, of course, has been a massive draw for people. So we are seeing numbers creep up over the past 2 to 3 weeks.
So speaking of spring break, here on CBSN, we always run live the COVID response team's press conferences that they have. And every time we hear from the director of the CDC, she expresses how nervous she is at watching all those people on the beaches at spring break. And, the CDC is still recommending that people who are fully vaccinated delay their travel for a little bit, both domestic and international. I'm wondering what the numbers are indicating, though. Are people actually listening to the CDC?
Well, when you look at the TSA numbers that we've just mentioned, it would appear that they are not. But you're right. The official guidance from the Centers for Disease Control is that you just don't travel at all, delay travel if you can, and that's even if you have been vaccinated. The science on that is not settled. Can someone who's been fully vaccinated still spread the coronavirus? The answer to that question, we just don't know yet. But Dr. Anthony Fauci, that's President Biden's chief medical advisor, was on Face the Nation on Sunday, and he was highlighting the fact that after the numbers have been plateauing for a few months now, they are now starting to creep back up. He says that's not attributable just to the fact that there are different variants. It is attributable to the fact that more people are traveling, more people are congregating because of spring break, and that still poses a risk. So on one side, you've got people just desperate to get outside, right? Enjoy the sunlight, go on a trip finally with their family. But on the other side, you have the science, which is that we're not through the pandemic yet. We've not overcome this, and so it's still incumbent upon everybody to take as many precautions as possible, even when the sun is shining outside.
Yeah, Dr. Fauci says we're like at the corner. We haven't turned the corner. We're at the corner. We don't necessarily have to turn if we don't sort of act correctly. So listen, I want to ask you about the cruise industry, probably kind of like the first portion of the travel industry that was just devastated by the coronavirus. And over the last year or so, every once in a while you hear a story about one cruise ship that was good to go and they, took off, and then there was an outbreak on board, and it just seems like the cruise industry has been limping along. What's the status for the cruise industry? Could we see ships in U.S. ports anytime soon?
It's looking that the earliest may be in the fall. You're right to assess the cruise industry being hammered and all of the businesses that feed it, that link to it, right? Some of the major cruise lines have announced a resumption of service for the summer to locations like the Caribbean and Europe, but not in the U.S. And that is because, as we go back to our original topic of the CDC, it has not released guidelines that allow cruise ships to resume service. They have what's called a conditional sail order that requires cruise lines to go on test missions, you could call it, and to meet certain criteria to resume service again. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis held a press conference on Friday with many of these cruise ship executives imploring the CDC to revise that sail order, to revise their guidance so that cruise ships can more quickly get back up and running again. We do know that cruise lines say that you'll have to prove having been vaccinated to book a trip, but there is that pressure, that economic pressure. So many of the cruise routes in the U.S. Begin and end in Florida. There is pressure to get them going again. But as you rightly note, that was where many of the first big super spreader events took place. And so there still poses a major risk by allowing cruise vessels to resume normal business.
Yeah, and you got to wonder just how comfortable the client base will be. People who cruise, they love cruises. They go year after year, but are they going to feel safe again? You know, that's the big question. Errol Barnett, thank you so much.
You got it. Great to see you, Anne-Marie.